James didn't yell. He never did. He just shut down. And when he walked out that night, all he said was, "You're too much, May. This possessiveness, it's exhausting." The sound of the lock clicking felt louder than his words. I stood there, barefoot on cold tiles, my heart hammering like I'd just run a marathon, even though all I did was ask him who Holly was and why she messaged him at midnight. He left me with silence. No calls, no texts, no nothing. For days, the worst part, I kept replaying everything I said, over and over. Was I really being possessive? Was it wrong to ask about a woman who used 3 heart emojis in a message to my boyfriend? My mind twisted itself in knots. I started doubting what I saw, doubting my own gut. But then something snapped in me, something quiet but permanent. I remember sitting on our bed, staring at the dresser drawer where his things used to be, and I felt this strange mix of rage and clarity. It wasn't about Holly. It wasn't about some dumb message. It was about how quickly James made me the villain for caring, and I'd had enough. I stopped calling him, stopped waiting, stopped needing answers. I went silent too, but mine wasn't the desperate kind. It was the kind that grows roots. It was maybe a week later when I bumped into Marco again. We hadn't talked in ages. He used to be in our friend group before he moved out of state. We ran into each other at a local bookstore, of all places. I was holding a coffee, flipping through some memoir I wasn't really interested in, when I heard his voice say, "Still reading the heavy stuff. May?" I turned and blinked. Marco. I laughed before I even finished the word. He looked the same. Broad shoulders, mischievous grin, like time hadn't touched him. His eyes had this spark, the kind that reminded you used to be happy once, before everything got complicated. We got coffee that day, then again 2 days later. We didn't talk about James. Not right away. Marco didn't press. He talked about his new job, how he hated the weather where he lived, how he missed the little things about this town. I listened more than I talked, and for the first time, in weeks, I wasn't spiraling in my head. Then came the message. James, 11:42 p.m. "So that's it? You're just gonna ignore me now?" I didn't reply. I stared at it for a while though. I wondered what made him text me at that hour. Boredom, guilt, ego. But I didn't bite. Marco was becoming a strange sort of comfort. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't tell me I was overreacting. He just listened. One evening we sat outside, a late-night diner, and out of nowhere, he said, "You ever feel like you gave someone the best of you, and they didn't even notice?" I looked at him, unsure how he knew the exact thing clawing at my chest. Every day, we were quiet after that, but the silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything we didn't say. That weekend, Holly posted a picture of her and James at some bar downtown. I only saw it because someone sent it to me, not knowing, or maybe knowing exactly, what they were doing. Her caption said, "Unexpected nights are the best ones." And James was there beside her, arm around her waist, smiling like nothing was wrong. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. Not this time, because I was already changing. I wasn't the May who used to wait for answers, or beg for clarity, or keep questioning herself until she broke in pieces. I was becoming someone else, someone sharper, someone stronger. James accused me of being possessive, so I stopped being reachable. I became untouchable. 2 weeks passed before James tried again. This time, he called. Twice. I watched the phone buzz silently on my nightstand. I didn't move to answer. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I realized I didn't owe him the same access he used to take for granted. I stared at his name flashing on the screen, James, home, and felt nothing. The word home didn't feel right anymore. It felt like a joke. I forgot to laugh at. Marco noticed the shift in me. We met at a quiet little rooftop bar that overlooked the city skyline, somewhere I'd never been, despite living here for years. He brought me there to reset the soul, he said, and I didn't tell him, but it worked. The air was crisp. The lights below looked like stars pretending to belong to Earth, and everything felt far away, especially James. Marco slid a drink toward me. You seem different. How so? I don't know. Like someone who finally burned the last bridge and isn't looking back. I smirked a little. Maybe I am. He raised his glass. To new roads. I clinked mine against his without thinking. I didn't want to admit it, but his presence was starting to do things to me. Quiet things. Things like soft smiles, long stares, little sparks that didn't feel like guilt, just possibility. Then came Holly. Not in a message, not in a post, in person. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was standing in line at the grocery store when she appeared behind me, like some ghost in designer sunglasses. May, she said, all fake sweet and wide-eyed. Oh my God, it's you. I turned slowly. Holly. She tilted her head. I've been meaning to reach out. James said you two were on a break. I hope there's no weirdness. Weirdness. I stared at her for a moment. There was something so clean and polished about her. Like she practiced being likable in front of a mirror every day. I wondered what James saw in her. Maybe it wasn't about her at all. Maybe it was just that she didn't question him. Maybe. She was easy. I smiled. No weirdness. We're very much done. But you should know, James has a habit of rewriting the story to make himself the hero. She blinked. I leaned in a little. So just be careful which version of him you fall in love with. I didn't wait for a reply. I left my cart right there in the aisle and walked out, my heart pounding, not from anger, but from the wild thrill of not caring anymore. That night, James left a voicemail. He sounded tired, worn down. I messed up, he said. I know I did. I shouldn't have said those things. To you. I miss you, May. But he didn't apologize for Holly. He didn't acknowledge the pictures, or the silence, or the way he walked away from me and made me the problem. And just like that, I knew he never would. I deleted the voicemail. Later that week, Marco and I sat in his truck after grabbing drive-through milkshakes, music humming low from the radio. I hadn't told him everything. Not yet, but I think he already knew. Some people just know how to read the wreckage in your silence. He looked over at me, his eyes soft but serious. I don't want to be a rebound, May. I held his gaze. You're not. You sure? 'Cause I'm not playing backup for anyone. You're not backup, I said quietly. You're the safe place I didn't know I needed. And maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe it was too soon, too raw, but it was true. I didn't want to run back to what broke me. I didn't want to prove anything to James. I didn't even want revenge. I just wanted peace. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was starting to taste it. Marco didn't kiss me that night. He could have. I think we both knew the space between us was charged, hanging like a held breath. But instead, he just sat there, eyes on mine, then looked back at the road and said, You deserve something real, not rushed. That did something to me. The old me, the May who used to measure her worth by how quickly someone came back after a fight. She would have leaned in, would have chased reassurance with lips and skin. But this May just smiled and said, Thanks for seeing me, not using me. Not fixing me, just seeing me. The next morning, I got a message from James's sister, Ella. We'd always been cool, brunch buddies, close enough to share shoes. She texted, "Hey, James isn't doing great. Not saying you should care, but he keeps talking about you." I stared at the screen, chewing my lip, thumb hovering over the keyboard. I didn't know how to explain that I wasn't mad at him anymore. I just wasn't his anymore. Still, a part of me got curious. Not for him, but for the closure I hadn't realized I needed. So I agreed to meet him, one time, one conversation. We sat across from each other at the same cafe, where he once told me he could see us growing old together. That memory played in my head like a cruel rerun. He looked tired, thinner. His eyes had the kind of sadness that made you wonder if regret had finally unpacked its bags. "I didn't mean what I said," he began. I folded my arms. "But you said it," he sighed. "I was trying to hurt you. I didn't like being questioned. I felt trapped." I nodded slowly. "So instead of being honest, you punished me. I thought you were trying to control me. And now, I know you were just scared. And I made you feel crazy for it." I didn't speak for a moment. Let him sit with the weight of that. He wasn't used to silence that wasn't begging for him to change. Finally, I said, "You never lied to me outright, James. You just made me feel guilty for seeing the truth." He winced. "What are we now?" I looked at him, really looked. The man I used to love. The man I waited for. The man who left me in pieces and blamed me for the mess. "We're done." He blinked, like he didn't believe it until that moment. "I don't hate you," I added, "but I've outgrown the version of me that begged to be enough for you." He looked like he wanted to argue, to fix, to rewind, but I stood up before he could. I placed enough cash on the table to cover my drink and walked away. Outside, the wind felt good, freeing. I didn't cry, not even a little. I just breathed. That night, Marco and I sat on my couch, watching some dumb movie with too much dialogue and not enough plot. My feet were tucked under his leg, and we weren't talking, but there was no awkwardness, no games, just calm. "I saw James today," I said eventually. Marco paused the movie. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "He said all the right things, but none of them changed the story." Marco nodded, quiet. "Do you think people really change?" I asked. He looked at me, thoughtful. "I think people evolve, but only when they lose what they took for granted. And if they don't, then they stay the same, and life moves on without them." I leaned into him, letting my head rest on his shoulder. "I'm not angry anymore." "Good," he said softly. "That means you're healing." We didn't say much else, but the silence this time, it didn't hurt. It felt like peace. And peace, after the kind of love I crawled out of, felt revolutionary. The days started to feel quieter, not lonely, just calm. Like my world had finally stopped spinning in circles, chasing after someone who never truly looked back. I got my own space again, signed a lease for a small apartment downtown, just 2 rooms and a kitchen that looked out over the street. It was nothing fancy, but it was mine. No shared drawers, no toothbrush beside the sink that didn't belong to me, no ghost of an argument clinging to the walls. When I told Marco I was moving, he showed up with pizza, 2 beers, and a toolbox. "I don't trust any apartment that doesn't need at least 1 screw tightened," he joked, already kneeling beside a wobbly cabinet. He didn't try to take over. He just helped, quietly, without asking for anything in return. After we finished unpacking, we sat on the floor surrounded by boxes, eating cold pizza and talking about nothing. I told him how I used to be afraid of being alone, how I used to fill the silence with noise, just so I wouldn't have to hear my own thoughts. You still scared of it? He asked, licking pizza grease off his thumb. No, I said. Now I think silence is honest. It tells you who you really are. Marco looked at me then, long and serious. And who are you now? I didn't answer. I wasn't sure yet, but I knew I wasn't the version of myself James knew. I wasn't the one who twisted into shapes just to be loved a little longer. Few nights later, James messaged me again. I saw your new place. It looks good on you. I stared at the message for a full minute before I blocked his number. I didn't need his approval. A few days after that, Holly posted a long paragraph about learning hard lessons and not every man is who he pretends to be. She didn't mention James by name, but the timeline was loud enough. I didn't feel smug, just relieved. Relieved that I got out before the damage buried deeper. At the same time, I wasn't exactly floating on clouds with Marco either. Things with him were gentle, and because they were gentle, they scared me more than they should have. One evening, we sat on my balcony, watching cars pass in the distance. He reached for my hand, and I pulled back, just slightly, barely a twitch. He noticed. You're still waiting for the other shoe to drop, he said quietly. I'm trying not to. He looked out at the city. I'm not James. I know that. But you're scared I'll become him anyway. I didn't answer. Because I was scared. Of trusting someone again. Of being wrong again. Of handing my heart over and realizing too late that I misread everything. He turned to me, gentle but firm. Let me be something different. That stayed with me, not because it was romantic, but because it felt like a promise. One he wasn't forcing on me. One he was offering if I was ready. I wasn't fully healed, but I was getting there. One small choice at a time. One boundary, one breath, one truth. And the truth was, I wanted to believe in someone again. I just didn't want to lose myself in the process. So I took his hand this time, not as an answer, but as a beginning. Things shifted after that night on the balcony. Not dramatically. There was no music swelling in the background, no fireworks or grand declarations, just little moments that started adding up. Marco stayed over a little more often. He made breakfast, sometimes, burned toast and overly sweet coffee. But he tried. I caught myself smiling more, laughing at dumb jokes, sleeping through the night without waking up in a panic, heart racing from dreams I couldn't explain, and slowly, I started letting go of the version of love I thought I needed. One afternoon, Marco brought over a photo album from when we were all still friends, back when James, Marco, me, and Holly used to hang out like we were untouchable. Before all the cracks, I hesitated when he pulled it out, unsure if I wanted to flip through those old memories. But he handed it to me, like he trusted me with the weight of it. There were photos of bonfires, beach days, road trips, me and James kissing in one, me and Holly laughing in another, Marco always in the background, grinning like he knew something none of us did. I traced the edge of a photo with my thumb and whispered, "We looked happy." He nodded. We were. Until we weren't. I looked up. "Did you ever think about me? Back then?" He didn't hesitate. "All the time." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you were with him. And because you deserved to figure things out without someone else clouding the water." That silenced me. Because deep down, I'd always wondered if anyone would choose me without needing to save me, without it being about timing or convenience, just me. Later that night, I had a dream about James. We were in the old apartment, arguing again. He was pacing, saying I was too much, too emotional, too demanding. In the dream, I tried to explain myself. I cried. I begged. I reached for him. And he turned his back. But this time, before I woke up, Dreamy just stopped. I walked away. Instead of chasing him, I let him leave without following. When I opened my eyes, I was tangled in Marco's arms. His hand was resting lightly on my waist, breath steady against the back of my neck, and I thought, this is how it should have felt all along. A week later, I got a message from Holly. I owe you an apology. I didn't know half of what was going on. I believed the version of you James told me, and I'm sorry. I stared at it for a long time. Forgiveness didn't come easy, not because I held grudges, but because I remembered every version of me that had to break so others could feel whole. Still, I replied, thanks. I hope you find what you're really looking for. That was it. No bitterness, no need to rehash. Some people don't deserve access to your healing, but sometimes letting go is more for you than it is for them. That night, Marco and I walked along the riverbank just after sunset. He threw pebbles into the water, one at a time. I walked beside him in silence, arms tucked into my coat. Eventually he said, "You know, I didn't come back for you." I looked at him, surprised. I came back for me, for a fresh start. I didn't expect this. Us, but I'm glad it's happening. That hit different, because love that doesn't expect you to perform, to bleed just to prove you're worthy. That kind of love feels quiet, and safe, and earned. I stepped closer, wrapped my fingers around his. I'm glad too, and I meant it. Not because he fixed me, but because I finally stopped waiting for someone to. Autumn came quietly. The leaves outside my apartment turned rust and gold, curling at the edges like time was folding in on itself. I started taking early morning walks. No headphones, no distractions. Just me and the sound of my own breathing. The silence that used to scare me had become a kind of music. Peace wasn't loud. It was soft, still, steady. Marco started leaving little things at my place. A book he thought I'd like, his hoodie that smelled like his cologne, a grocery receipt with a note scribbled on the back, "Buy more tea." Also, "You're doing better than you think." It made me smile every time. But healing isn't a straight road, and it's never smooth all the way through. One evening, I went to a friend's birthday party, just a casual backyard thing. Old friends, string lights, music. Marco had a last-minute work thing and couldn't make it. I told him it was fine, and it was. At least until James showed up. I saw him across the yard, talking to someone I didn't recognize. He hadn't seen me yet. My stomach knotted, and, for a second, I felt that old version of myself creeping in, the one who used to shrink around him, second-guess everything, make herself smaller to avoid confrontation. But then he turned, and our eyes met. It was strange, like seeing someone you used to dream about, and realizing you couldn't even remember why. He came over, of course. "Didn't think you'd be here," he said, sliding his hands into his pockets. "Didn't think you would either," I replied, voice calm. He looked at me for a beat. "You look different." "I am." He glanced around, then leaned in slightly. "So, you and Marco." I raised a brow. "You and curiosity." That stung him, I think. "Good." He smirked like he used to. That fake confidence mask he wore when he didn't know what else to say. "I never wanted to lose you, you know." "You didn't lose me," I said. "You let me go." I walked away before he could reply. I didn't know him more than that. I stood near the fire pit with a drink in hand, warming my fingers, when my phone buzzed. Marco. "Still awake? Hope the party's not too boring without me." I typed back. "Not boring. Just reminded why I'm not where I used to be." Him. "I like where you are now." "Me too." That night when I got home, Marco was waiting outside my building. Hoodie, jeans, tired eyes, and a smile that made me feel safe. Before he even said a word, "I figured you might want to talk," he said. "I saw James," I told him. It didn't shake me, not like it used to. He nodded. "That's growth." I hesitated. Sometimes I wonder how I didn't see it sooner. How blind I was. Marco leaned back against the wall. We all want to believe in people we love. Doesn't make you blind. Makes you human. Still feels like I wasted so much time. You didn't, he said gently. You were learning how to choose yourself. I looked up at him, heart softening. You're really not going anywhere, are you? No, he said. But not because I need to rescue you. I just want to walk beside you while you rescue yourself. That was it. That was the moment I knew I was finally free. Not just from James, or from what he did, but from the version of me who thought she had to be less just to be loved more. And right there, in that small space between a streetlight and an open door, I let go of the last thread tying me to the past. A few weeks later, I got asked to speak at a local women's panel, a small community event for mental health awareness. The organizer was a mutual friend who had seen my quiet transformation from the outside and thought I might have something worth sharing. I almost said no. I didn't think I had the right words, or the credentials, or the strength to sit in front of strangers and talk about something that once nearly broke me. But Marco nudged me. Say yes, not because you owe anyone your story, but because you might be the voice someone else needs to hear. So, I said yes. The night of the panel, I stood on stage in a room full of folding chairs, lukewarm coffee, and women of all ages holding parts of themselves together with silent hope. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the mic and tried not to shake. I used to think love meant proving yourself. I began. That the more you gave, the more someone would stay. That if they left, it meant I wasn't enough. But I was wrong. They left because they couldn't handle enough. And I stopped shrinking, just to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. I paused, looking around the room. Some women nodded. A few were already crying. I was told I was possessive, too intense, too emotional. But what I really was aware. I saw the shift. I asked the questions. And when I didn't get answers, I blamed myself. But not anymore. Now I see that trust isn't built by silence. And love isn't real if it asks you to silence your intuition. I didn't say James's name. I didn't need to. After the panel, a woman in her 40s came up to me, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I stayed in something for 10 years because I thought it was my fault. You just told me it wasn't." I hugged her. No words could have said more than that moment. That night, back at my place, Marco wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "You were incredible." I looked up at him. I didn't know I had it in me. "You always did," he said. "You just needed space to see it." Something had shifted again. This time, deeper. We weren't rushing. We weren't playing house or pretending to be perfect. But he started leaving things behind on purpose. A second toothbrush, a spare hoodie, his favorite mug. And I let him because this wasn't filling a void. This was building something. One slow morning, we laid in bed. The window cracked just enough to let in the smell of rain. I was curled up under the blanket, scrolling through photos, when Marco rolled over, his voice thick with sleep. "Would you hate me if I said I love you?" I turned my head, heart thudding. "No, I'd just hate it if you didn't mean it." He smiled. "I mean it," and I knew he did. But instead of rushing to say it back, I leaned in and kissed him softly. I didn't need to match his words on command. Love isn't a competition. It's a presence. And mine was growing, steady and real, with no pressure to perform. Later that day, I passed by the old apartment building James and I used to live in. I didn't stop. I didn't look up at the window that used to be mine. I just kept walking. Because the version of me that lived there, she's not here anymore, and the one walking now, she's untouchable. Not because she's cold or guarded, or bitter, but because she knows her worth, and she doesn't hand it over like it's up for debate. The final piece of it came quietly, like most important things do. It had been nearly a year since James walked out. A year since I stood in our empty apartment, crushed under the weight of a sentence that tried to define me. You're too much. And now, those words felt like a distant echo from a different life. They didn't sting anymore. They didn't hold power, because I had rewritten the story. One morning, I woke up before Marco. The light coming in through the window painted the room soft gold. He was still asleep beside me, hand resting on my hip like he belonged there. It wasn't possessive. It wasn't clingy. It was peace in skin and bone and warmth. I laid there, watching him, realizing I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. I wasn't bracing for betrayal. I wasn't tiptoeing around someone else's ego. I wasn't asking for love. I was receiving it, freely and without terms. Later over breakfast, Marco looked at me and said, "You've been really quiet lately." "I've just been thinking," I said, about how proud I am of who I've become." He smiled. "You should be." "I was so scared I'd lose myself," I said. "But I think I had to." He reached across the table, lacing his fingers with mine. "You didn't lose yourself, May. You burned what wasn't really you to begin with." That stayed with me. We didn't need to talk about the past anymore. Not him, not me, not the pieces we once clung to. But it lingered sometimes. Ghosts don't vanish just because you stop mentioning their names. A few weeks later, I ran into James again, this time by complete accident, at a bookstore, of all places. The same one where I'd run into Marco, not long after our breakup. Funny how the universe folds like that. James was alone. No Holly, no friends. Just him and a paperback in hand. He saw me and froze, unsure whether to nod or speak, or just disappear. I gave him a small smile. "I'm glad you're doing well," he said quietly, stepping closer, but not too close. "You look settled." "I am," I said. He looked like he wanted to say more, like maybe he thought this could be a second chance, a rewrite, an invitation back into a world he no longer belonged to. But I didn't give him that. I didn't need to be cruel. I just needed to walk away, and I did, outer, the door, into the sunlight, toward a life that didn't carry his shadow anymore. Back at home, Marco was cooking. Badly. Something was burning slightly, and he was muttering to himself, like he always did when trying to wing it. I walked in, wrapped my arms around his back, and said, "Whatever it is, it smells like optimism." He laughed. "It's called blind confidence." I rested my chin on his shoulder. "I love you." It was the first time I'd said it, and it felt right. Not because I needed to say it, not because I feared losing him, but because I wanted him to know what lived inside my chest now. Something whole, something unbroken. He turned around, eyes warm and sure. "I love you too." That was it. No grand finale, no fireworks. Just two people who found each other on the other side of pain. Both whole in their own ways, choosing to walk forward. And me? I wasn't someone who begged anymore. I wasn't someone who doubted her worth, or twisted herself to be chosen. I was someone who was once called too much, and I became untouchable. Not because I hardened, but because I finally knew. I was never the problem. I was the fire. Let me know if you'd like another story next.